Have you ever been in an English conversation and felt like there was a tiny translator working inside your brain? Like, someone says something in English, and before you can respond, your brain goes, "Okay, translate that into Portuguese, understand it in Portuguese, think of the answer in Portuguese, now translate the answer back into English, now check if the translation is correct, now say it." And by the time that entire process finishes, the conversation has moved on. The moment is gone. And you're left standing there with a perfectly translated sentence that nobody needs anymore. I know this process. I lived this process for years. And today we are going to talk about why your brain does this, and more importantly, how to make it stop. Welcome to Fluency with Vivi. I'm Vivi, and this is Robert.
Hey everyone, I'm Robert, and I want to say right away, if what Vivi just described sounds very familiar to you, you are not alone. The mental translation habit is probably the most universal struggle I see in English learners. Every single student I've ever worked with has dealt with this. Every one.
Every single one?
Every single one, without exception. And the good news is, it's not permanent, it's a habit, and habits can change. But first, Vivi, tell me about the translation.
Oh, you want the story?
I always want the story.
Okay, so my first week working at an international company, my first real professional environment in English, and my manager, very nice American woman, comes to my desk and says completely casually, "Hey, Vivi, can you touch base with the client before EOD?"
Ha! Touch base before EOD.
Robert, I had no idea what either of those things meant. None. So my brain went into full emergency translation mode. Touch base, touching, a base, like baseball. And EOD. What is EOD? End of something. And my manager is standing there waiting for my answer, and I'm internally Googling corporate English vocabulary.
What did you say?
I said yes, absolutely, with complete confidence. And then I went back to my desk and typed touch base EOD meaning into Google as fast as humanly possible.
Ha! And what did you discover?
That touch base means to make a quick contact with someone, and EOD means end of day, which is, in retrospect, very obvious. But in the moment, my brain was so busy translating every individual word that it completely missed the meaning of the whole phrase.
And this is the core problem with mental translation. When you translate word by word, you miss the meaning of the whole thing. Because English doesn't work word by word. It works in chunks, in phrases, in ideas.
So translating each word is actually the wrong unit of measurement.
Exactly. It's like trying to understand a song by looking up every single note individually. The notes matter, but the music is in how they flow together.
Oh, I love that metaphor. The music is in how they flow together.
When you translate word by word, you're processing notes. But fluency means processing music.
Okay, so why do we do it? Why does the brain default to translation? Because I didn't choose to translate, it just happened automatically.
Great question. And the answer is really about how the brain learns new things. When you first start learning English, translation is actually a useful tool. It's your brain being efficient. It says, I already have a system for understanding the world, Portuguese. Let me just map this new language onto the system I already have.
So translation is the brain being lazy in a smart way.
Huh? Exactly. It's taking a shortcut. Instead of building a whole new system for English, it borrows the existing Portuguese system and puts English words into it.
Which works at the beginning.
Which works at the beginning for basic communication, but it has a ceiling, and most learners hit that ceiling between intermediate and advanced level. They can communicate, but slowly, with effort, with that exhausting translation process running constantly in the background.
It's so exhausting. I remember feeling genuinely tired after English conversations. Not emotionally tired, physically tired. Like my brain had been running a marathon.
Because it had been. Running two languages simultaneously, translating back and forth constantly, requires enormous cognitive energy. It's like driving with the handbrake on. The car moves, but it takes so much more effort than it should.
Driving with the handbrake on. That is exactly what it feels like. You're moving, but everything is harder than it needs to be.
And the real goal of fluency, is to release the handbrake, to think directly in English, to stop using Portuguese as the middleman.
Okay, so how do you actually do that? Because I think people understand the concept, but the translation happens automatically. You can't just decide to stop.
You're right, you can't just decide to stop, but you can build a new habit that gradually replaces the translation habit. And that's what our strategies are about today. Strategy 1. Start attaching English words to images and feelings, not to Portuguese words.
What does that mean practically?
It means, when you learn a new English word or phrase, don't store it as word equals translation. Store it as word equals experience. For example, the word cozy. Instead of cozy equals aconchegante, think cozy equals that feeling of being in a warm blanket on a cold, rainy day with a hot drink in your hands.
Oh, that's actually so different. Because now cozy isn't a word I have to translate. It's a feeling I already know, and the English word is directly attached to that feeling.
Exactly. You bypass Portuguese completely. The word goes straight to the experience, and that's how native speakers store words. Not as translations, but as direct connections to meaning.
How do you do this with abstract words, though, like freedom or justice?
Same principle. Don't think freedom equals liberdade. Think, freedom equals that feeling you had the last time you were completely unbothered, completely yourself, with no obligations and no fear. That specific feeling. Attach the English word directly to that feeling.
So vocabulary learning completely changes. Instead of word lists with translations, you need experiences, images, feelings.
You need living vocabulary, not stored vocabulary. Words you feel, not words you file.
Words you feel, not words you file. I love that. Strategy 2.
Strategy 2. Practice thinking in English during low-stakes moments throughout your day, not during conversations. That's too much pressure at first. During simple private moments.
Like what kind of moments?
When you're making coffee in the morning, describe what you're doing in English, in your head. I'm filling the kettle. The water is boiling. I love the smell of coffee. When you're walking somewhere, narrate what you see. There's a red car. The sky is cloudy today. That dog looks very happy.
This sounds almost too simple.
It sounds simple, but what it does is extraordinary. Every time you form a thought directly in English, without going through Portuguese first, you are strengthening the direct connection between your brain and English. You're building a new neural pathway, a shortcut that bypasses translation.
And it accumulates.
It accumulates enormously. 5 minutes of English thinking in the morning, 5 minutes on the way to work, 5 minutes before you sleep. That's 15 minutes a day of building fluency. With zero pressure, zero audience, zero stakes.
I actually started doing something like this a couple of years ago, and the first few days felt ridiculous, like I was pretending. But after 2 weeks,
What happened?
I caught myself thinking about something completely unrelated to English practice. And I was thinking it in English, without deciding to, without effort. It just happened. And I remember feeling genuinely shocked. Like, wait, did my brain just think in English on its own?
That's the moment. That's when you know the new pathway is forming.
It felt like a tiny miracle, honestly.
Huh. It's not a miracle. It's neuroscience. But it does feel miraculous when it first happens.
Strategy 3.
Strategy 3. When you get stuck in translation during a conversation, don't fight it. Redirect it.
What does that mean?
It means, when you notice yourself starting to translate, instead of panicking or forcing the translation to go faster, take a breath and simplify. Ask yourself, what is the simplest way I can express this idea directly in English? Not the perfect way, the simplest way.
So you abandon the translation and look for a different route.
Exactly. Instead of trying to translate a complex Portuguese sentence, find the core of what you want to say and express that directly. I think this is good is infinitely better than a perfect translation of a complex Portuguese thought that takes 10 seconds and loses the conversation.
Simple and present beats perfect and late.
Always. And here's the beautiful thing. When you simplify and speak, you keep the conversation alive. And a living conversation gives you more input, more exposure, more opportunities to hear English and absorb it. Translation kills conversations. Simplification saves them.
I want to say something about this before we close, because I think there's a moment, a specific moment, when learners realize the translation is starting to go away. And I want to describe it so people know what to look for.
Please.
It happens in very ordinary moments, not in big, important conversations. You're watching something in English, a show, a video, and you realize you've been watching for 20 minutes and you never once thought about the Portuguese. You just understood, directly, without the middleman.
The middleman disappears.
He just quietly leaves. And one day you look around and he's not there anymore. And you think, oh, when did that happen? And the answer is gradually, and then all at once.
Gradually and then all at once. That's exactly how fluency arrives.
And it will arrive for everyone listening, not because they're talented, not because they're special, but because they kept going. They kept exposing themselves to English. They kept thinking in English even when it felt silly. They kept speaking even when translation was tempting.
The translation habit is built over years, and it dissolves over months. If you give your brain the right experiences.
The right experiences, which are exactly what this podcast is. Every episode you listen to, you are giving your brain a direct English experience, without translation in the middle, just meaning flowing directly in.
Which is why we always say, just listen. You don't have to study this. You don't have to translate it. Just let it in.
Okay, your challenge this week. Pick one moment every day, just one, where you think in English instead of Portuguese. It can be 30 seconds while you make your coffee. It can be 1 minute while you walk. Whatever feels manageable, and do it every day this week. And then come tell us in the comments, in English, one simple sentence about something you noticed this week. Maybe you caught yourself translating. Maybe you caught yourself not translating and it surprised you. One sentence. That's it. We want to hear it.
And if this episode gave you a new way to think about translation, please hit that like button. It helps more people find us. And subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next week.
I'm Vivi.
And I'm Robert.
This is Fluency with Vivi. Stop translating, start feeling. See you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.